So this evening I'd like to start with a relatively brief meditation practice that hopefully will set the stage for the material that we'll be covering this evening. So if you are already familiar with meditation practice, then you can start now placing your body and your mind in a conducive attitude or a conducive posture. If you're not familiar, then I'll just give a few introductory statements, some guidelines. So let's make sure that we're sitting either on the floor or on a chair in a way that we find, first of all, comfortable. This is not an endurance test. So we should be comfortable. But at the same time, our posture should be upright and alert, because the way we hold our body does have a very profound effect on the way our mind functions. So there is an image I like to share, many people here have already heard it, that can help place our physical posture in the most conducive attitude. And this image is to imagine that we are a great tree at this time. You know, like a tree is like a redwood in the sense that its trunk is upright and straight, but it's like a maple or an oak in the sense that it has an extensive root system that anchors it firmly to the ground. So as we sit, imagine that from the lower portions of our body, we're sending down root-like extensions. And these extensions grow down from the lower portions of our body. They penetrate through the cushion or our seat, and through the floor, and enter into the earth. Even though this is just an imaginary practice, where we send our mind definitely has an effect. So as we send our mind, meaning as we send our attention downwards, following these imaginary roots, we do make contact with the stable earth element below us. So using the full force of one's imagination, send down these roots so that we feel anchored to the earth. And once we feel sufficiently anchored in this way, we follow the energy in the earth upwards through these roots into our body. This is very similar to the way that water and nutrients are absorbed into the root system of a great tree, and then very slowly makes its way up the trunk and out the branches and into the leaves, pulled upwards by the action of the sun. So in a similar fashion, follow the energy as it moves upwards through these imaginary roots and enters our body from below. And follow this energy as it makes its way up, very, very slowly and deliberately, up the trunk of our body In other words, up our spinal column. Try to make this upward movement in which we're paying attention to the rising of the energy, try to make it as slow and as deliberate as possible. There's no need to rush here. And as we follow this energy up the spinal column, we'll notice that it encounters pockets of resistance, pockets of frustrated energy. These are areas in which we subconsciously hold tension. They also can be the repositories for the effects of negative karma and the like. The accretions of the various delusions. For instance, if we get very angry, this can create a blocked energy that we might hold somewhere in our physical body. And much of this blocked energy is held along the spine. So as we follow this energy that came up the roots and entered our body from below, as we follow it upwards, feel that this slowly rising energy dissolves these blockages. Releases these pockets of energy. And we might find it helpful, as we're following this energy so slowly and deliberately upwards, to allow our body to sway. Again, like a great redwood in a forest and the wind begins to blow, the redwood sways very slowly side to side or front to back, because with this gentle swaying motion comes further release of these pockets of energy. The movement we're talking about here is very subtle, but even a slight movement is enough to unblock these pockets of resistance. And as we continue to follow this energy up, through the back of our abdomen, near the spinal column, and eventually making its way to the back, up at the back of our chest, the back of our neck, all the way up to the back of our head. As we follow this energy upwards, we might notice that our posture is gently elongating, as if we're sitting a bit higher and a bit straighter than we normally do. Again, it's only a very subtle difference, but we can feel the effect that it has on our mind. Now, if we have been allowing the body to sway, as described before, we can let that sway come to an end by itself. So at this point, we can feel well connected to the earth below us, and from this firm foundation, our posture arises in a naturally upright manner. The energy has risen up the spinal column all the way to the crown of our head. Now again, using our imagination, follow this energy upwards out of the body. Here the movement can be a bit more rapid if we like. We follow this energy upwards through the ceiling of this room and the roof, up through the atmosphere, up and out into space itself. And as we send our mind, our attention upwards in this way, it expands, experiencing the limitlessness, the boundlessness of space itself. The mind itself is limitless. So by making contact with the space element above us, we are allowing the mind to naturally expand. Now we begin to descend slowly back into our body from above. So follow the energy in reverse, from space into the atmosphere of this earth, down through the atmosphere, descending through the roof and the ceiling of this room, till it reaches a point just above the crown of our head. And enters us slowly and deliberately from above. Then we allow our attention to sweep slowly downwards, in through the crown of our head, through the back of our head, and the back of our throat, down slowly into the chest cavity, deep within it, back towards the spine, until we reach a point that is on the level of our physical heart. But because our heart is slightly to the left of center of our body, whereas the energy that we're following is at the center of our body, the point our attention comes to rest at is slightly to the right of our physical heart, much closer to the back of our body than our front. This center is called the heart chakra, or the heart wheel, which is the natural home, the source of our consciousness. So allow our mind to rest gently within the heart chakra. Feel this is the center of our conscious awareness. If our attention becomes flighty, easily distracted, if we feel in the need of stronger concentration, then re-establish a connection with the earth element below. We don't have to go down into the earth. Merely thinking about our experience when we contacted the earth element earlier will bring that quality into our consciousness. For the earth element provides stability, and on the basis of that stability, the mind can remain calm and concentrated. So it is enough to feel the magnetic connection between our mind in our heart and the earth element that supports us. Perhaps the problem that we experience is the opposite. That our mind is too heavy, that our thoughts are too vague, confused and unclear. Or perhaps the heaviness has increased to such a point that the mind is becoming drowsy, on the verge of sleep. So to refresh the mind, to enhance its sense of innate clarity, awareness, and alertness, we recall the experience when we contacted the space element above. Boundless, limitless consciousness, unconfined. For our meditation to be of maximum benefit, our mind should be stable and concentrated on one hand, and yet aware, alert, and clear on the other. So for just 1 or 2 minutes, let us stay in this state of choiceless awareness. Our mind is like a mirror or the surface of a still lake. Capable of reflecting anything that appears to it, and yet, at the same time, remaining unmoved. So as we sit in this state of choiceless awareness, all sorts of appearances may be reflected in the clear surface of our mind. Allow ourselves to be completely aware of whatever appears, and yet at the same time remaining unmoved like a mirror. If an attractive thought or image appears to the mind, note it, be aware of it, but there is no need to run after it. If the appearance is a threatening one, something we find unpleasant, note that as well, but there is no need to run away from it, to block it or deny it. Simply stay in this reflective state of choiceless awareness. Now we can allow our mind to arise slowly from whatever state of meditative absorption we may have entered. It might seem as if we were returning to our physical body. Sensations and so forth. Return. And if we, at this point, we discover that our meditation posture, since we've been sitting for, many of us have been sitting for a half an hour or more, if we discover that our meditation posture has become somewhat stiff or uncomfortable, then again, in a very slow and deliberate manner, we can bend or stretch, or, if it is necessary, we can stand. To relax whatever tension may have built up in the body, or to relieve any pain that may have grown in the meanwhile. But if we do any of these motions, standing, bending, stretching, and so forth, let us do so slowly and mindfully. This way, whatever depth of meditative concentration we experienced in the meditation itself can be maintained. A quick, abrupt, or violent movement of the body can sever the connection we had with that meditative state of mind. So let our movements, if any, be careful and deliberate. It's at this point, if we had gained some familiarity with a yogic practice, such as doing neck twists or shoulder shrugs or any of a number of different physical exercises that we might have become introduced to, this would be a time to do any of those actions which enhance our ability to maintain a comfortable and yet upright meditation posture. So, so this evening we're continuing with the, with what is now the second of these meetings to practice, to study and practice the art known in Tibetan as lojong. And who remembers from last time the meaning of this Tibetan phrase lojong? Oh, I told you I was going to start giving quizzes if I don't get good answers. Do you remember? Ah, good. Thank you. Mind training. Lojong. Lo means mind, and jung has this connotation of taming or training. So it's often translated as the training of the mind. And just to recap just slightly, these lojong teachings, they all derive ultimately from the teachings of Buddha himself, but they were put into this particular form of practice by a great Indian master who lived 1,000 years ago. Does anyone remember his name? Atisha. Very good. Good, Atisha. That's not a name that's well known in the West, unless one happens to be a Buddhist practitioner, specifically a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner. But Atisha is one of the great contributors to the world, in fact, whether people know it or not. And compiling these lojong teachings is one of his major contributions. And the main purpose of these lojong teachings, this training of the mind, is to cultivate a compassionate motivation. Now, all of the Buddhist teachings, all of them without exception, are a training of the mind. But here, when we use this specific phrase, lojong, or training of the mind, it's concentrating specifically on one aspect, one major aspect of the Buddhist teachings. There is one quality in particular that these trainings are used to cultivate. What is that? Bodhicitta. Very good. Bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is a Sanskrit term made up of two parts, bodhi and citta. What does bodhi mean? Awake, yes? Awake. It's often simply translated enlightenment. Okay? And it's obviously related to the word Buddha, which means the awakened one, the one who is woken up from the sleep of ignorance. So bodhi is the state achieved by awakened beings, enlightenment itself. And I think I pointed out last time, some people are familiar with this word Bodhi from the phrase the Bodhi tree, the tree of enlightenment, the tree under which Buddha manifested enlightenment in his 35th year, and the central place of Buddhist pilgrimage in the world. So Bodhi. Chitta. Chitta can be translated in many different ways. It can be translated accurately as mind or heart, because in this context, the dichotomy we normally make between mind and heart disappears. So one term that covers both our mental attitudes and our emotional, heartfelt attitudes is simply that, attitude. So chitta can be understood as an attitude. So it's the enlightenment attitude, bodhi chitta. But in this context, it doesn't mean the mind or the attitude of someone who's already attained enlightenment. We're not talking here about the mind or the attitude of a Buddha. What are we talking about? If it's the enlightenment attitude or the enlightenment heart or the enlightenment mind, and it's not the mind of a Buddha, then who is it the mind of? Anyone? A bodhisattva. Oh, here's some more Sanskrit. It's the attitude, the mind, the motivation, truly the motivation of a bodhisattva. So what's a bodhisattva? Some people, when they hear the term bodhisattva, they think, bodhisattva, it's a nice guy. Well, I think most bodhisattvas are nice guys, using guys in the non-gender specific term, usage of that term, okay? But it has a rather specific meaning, a bodhisattva. What is a bodhisattva? Okay, so here has the same beginning, bodhi, right, enlightenment, and then sattva. Sattva just means being, okay? So again, strictly, literally translated, enlightenment being. But a Buddha is an enlightenment being. A Buddha is an awakened being, someone who's achieved that state. But we're not talking about a Buddha here, we're talking about a bodhisattva. So what's the distinction? Yes? Someone who's on the path to enlightenment. In other words, someone who has the motivation to become enlightened. Right? So enlightenment, bodhi, becomes the goal, the aim of this being, of this sattva. So some people, when they translate this term bodhisattva, they add a little word in between. Instead of calling him or her an enlightenment being, they will say enlightenment-bound being. Right? Someone aiming for or heading for enlightenment. Someone who's motivated to achieve this state of spiritual awakening. Okay? And if we look at it that way, then we can get more of a handle on the bodhicitta. The bodhicitta, the enlightenment attitude or the enlightenment mind, again, is the attitude or the mind or the motivation to win this enlightenment, to achieve this enlightenment, to wake up out of the sleep of ignorance and experience the full scope of our conscious potential. Now, we started today with a brief meditation, and some of us may have gotten off on it, and some of us may not have. But probably to some extent, even if it was only a little bit, that meditation gave us some indication that our mind is capable of a lot more than we ordinarily think. That it has this potential for infinite expansion. Right? That our mind can be calm and concentrated without being dull. That it can be alert and awake without being flighty, without becoming an airhead, right? See, ordinarily, we're often quite extreme beings. And here's a hint. Whenever you hear me say, we are this or we are that, I just mean I am this. And maybe there's a few other people who might share the traits, unfortunately. Okay? So we tend to be extreme beings. In other words, if our mind is stable, it drifts into lethargy and sleepiness very easily. And if our mind is clear and alert, it tends to be distracted and flighty. You know, becoming like a space case. Okay? So the mind has the capability of being both stable and concentrated and firm on one hand, so that it can be placed on whatever object it chooses, unwaveringly. And it also has, at the same time, the ability to be expansive, to be boundless, to be clear, to be alert, to be aware of things we aren't ordinarily aware of. So when we can cultivate both of these qualities at the same time, then we enter into a realm or a region of consciousness that we often are unaware of. And so even tasting it briefly gives us an indication, some indication, of the power and the potential of our consciousness, of our mind. This potential, when fully realized, is what is meant, in fact, by enlightenment, by Bodhi, by Buddhahood. So a Buddha is simply a person who's not necessarily a Buddhist, simply a person who has awakened from this sleep in which our mind, our heart contracts and is out of touch with its expansive, calm, peaceful qualities, and is caught up in its own little drama, the drama of this petty existence, in which we cast ourselves 1 minute as heroes, 1 minute as villains, 1 minute as sages, another as a fool, but are never fully in contact with the full potential of our heart, of our mind, of our consciousness. Okay? So anyone who has awakened from that sleep and is experiencing the full expansive powers of his or her consciousness, and thereby is allowing these qualities, these innate qualities of loving compassion, of wisdom, insight, and this skillful ability to be present and therefore to be able to truly help others. Anyone who is woken up to that state is an awakened being or a Buddha. And so a bodhisattva then is simply a person who is striving to wake up, to experience this full expansion of consciousness and all the qualities that we associate with mind and heart. Mm-hmm. But now the question comes, why? Why? Why wake up? What's the motive? That's the goal. That's the goal, Buddhahood, awakening. But why? Now, that might sound like a silly question, because even just hearing it described like that, it sounds pretty nice, doesn't it? To have a fully expansive consciousness, to have the kind of mind or heart which effortlessly gives rise to love, compassion, wisdom, and skill. And one other trait which I didn't mention, that it is a blissful consciousness. It's not an unhappy mind. It's described as a blissful consciousness. Even such a being in the midst of misery sympathetically aware of that misery, perhaps even crying sympathetically for that misery that others are experiencing, still maintains at the foundation of his or her being a blissful, aware consciousness. These are not contradictory. Okay? So the question, why attain enlightenment, sounds like a no-brainer. You know, because it's groovy. You know, it's great. You know, it feels wonderful. You know, it's like years ago there used to be a Coca-Cola advertisement. It's on the back. It's in the back of your mind. It's what you're hoping to find. It's Coca-Cola. It's the real thing. You know? So enlightenment is the real thing. You know. Whether we know it or not, we all want to wake up. We want to experience fulfillment, not just sensory pleasure. Of course, that motivates so much of our actions. You know, to taste pleasure, to avoid pain. Certainly that motivates us. But in and of itself, that way of living our life is just not sufficient, because still there's something deeper which is not being expressed, which is not being fulfilled. And it's this deeper fulfillment, this deeper longing, that is the true longing of the heart. So, since enlightenment is described as this state in which all of the obscurations currently limiting our consciousness have been removed and overcome, and since all of the mind's innate good qualities have been fully developed, then it seems clear we want to attain enlightenment because it's what we're hoping to find. It's our ultimate goal. But this answer itself, though true, is not sufficient. It's not sufficient. Did anyone hazard an opinion as to why that's not sufficient? That the motive for achieving enlightenment is because it feels good. Because we're not alone. That's probably the best and most succinct answer that we could give to that question. Yeah, we're not alone. We live in a world with others. It's quite clear. Look around. You know, sometimes it might feel like we're the only one in our universe, but we're not. We share it with other beings who have the same longing desires that we do. Both the, what we might call the impure longing desires, as well as the pure ones. Right? You know, we want to experience as many pleasant sights and sounds and smells and tastes and tactile sensations as we can, and we want to avoid as many negative and ugly and disturbing sights and sounds and smells and taste and tactile sensations as we can. So that's kind of the ordinary longing desires that we have. Right? But more than that, they share this same innate longing for fulfillment, for meaning, for purpose in their life, to experience peace, to experience a sense of well-being, to experience happiness. Happiness. Not surface pleasure, you know, titillation, sensation, but true happiness. And fulfillment. Okay? So here we are in this universe in which everyone, consciously or unconsciously, is hoping to find that Coca-Cola, you know, that awakening, that meaning in their life. So, that's one way in which there is this shared aspiration between us and all other living beings. But the connection with others goes deeper than that. We're not only not alone in terms of the population, that the population of the world is not one, you know, just human beings on this planet, it's upwards of 6 billion, okay? Not counting all the other forms of life. And all the other planets, for that matter. Okay? But it goes beyond that. All of us are interconnected. It isn't just that we sit in this room or on this planet next to each other, but our welfare and the welfare of other beings forms a network, are intimately interconnected. I think it was last week, but I don't quite remember, that I brought up an example which is widely used in this regard, and that is food. You know, as long as we have this kind of body, we like food, you know. Some people say that they eat to live, but a lot of us live to eat. You know, it's kind of a major desire for us, isn't it? Right? So, where does the food that we eat, specifically, where did the food that we ate, if you had dinner before you came here, where did the food that you ate a few hours ago, where did it come from? You know, like maybe you had rice. So, did you plant the rice? All right? Maybe you prepared it. And maybe you didn't even do that. Maybe someone else did. Right? But even if we assume that we actually prepared it, we actually cooked it and put it on the plate, everything else, how it got onto that plate, is due to the interaction of hundreds, thousands, millions of other beings. Right? If you've ever lived in a country like Asia, for example, or in the southern parts of the United States where they grow rice, it's very labor-intensive. Right? You have to flood fields, you have to transplant, and during this process, many, many insects and small animals are drowned. Okay? So, you know, we might have the pride of being vegetarian, but don't think that by eating rice we're not involved in the death of a lot of beings. It's just not true. We are. I'm not saying this to make us feel guilty. This is just a reality. Our lives and the lives of other beings on this planet are intimately interconnected. So the people who planted the rice, transplanted the rice, harvested the rice, sold it, bought it, transported it, packaged it, all the way up to preparing it, were, in the vast majority of the cases, well over 99% of the cases, people other than ourselves. Which means, in short, if it hadn't been for them, we wouldn't have had rice to eat. It's as simple as that. So then we can say, all right, then I would have eaten wheat. Well, that's not really an answer, is it? Because anything that we can think of, virtually anything that we can think of to support ourselves, comes from the connected efforts of other beings, beings who are just like ourselves in their desire to be happy and to avoid misery. And now, when we consider that, we start to come up with a much better answer as to why someone might strive to become enlightened, to wake up from the sleep of ignorance. Why would that be? You kind of put those together. What kind of answer would you come up with? Anyone?
To benefit others.
To benefit others. Yeah, another short, to the point answer. To benefit others. The state of enlightenment, as described, had these qualities that I mentioned, right? Loving compassion, you know, which is the wish to that other beings be happy and to be separated from their suffering. Okay? It had the quality of wisdom, in other words, the insight to understand how things really are put together. You know, not to have a vague or confused idea, but to see it clearly. For instance, one aspect of wisdom, one of many, is to understand the workings of cause and effect. To understand that certain actions lead to certain results. Some of these are obvious, but some are hidden. And we have to have a very clear consciousness to see them. Comes to mind in something that someone told me, I imperfectly remembered, unfortunately, but they were talking about someone who had this compassionate desire to help this sea creature. I think it was some kind of bird. And so they were saving these birds and reintroducing them into the wild in what they felt was a safe place. But what they didn't understand was that by bringing this animal into that particular environment, it created enormous problems over the long run, both for those animals and the other animals in that ecosystem. Okay? You can probably fill in the details of something like that much better than I can, because you know, the delicate nature of ecosystems is something that is you know, a well-respected science now, isn't it? Many, many examples. Okay? So what that means is that we might do an action out of compassion, but if we don't have the wisdom to understand the workings of cause and effect, we might easily louse things up instead of making them better. Isn't that true? I remember one case where the daughter of a close friend of mine, it's almost like my own daughter, she was performing up on a stage, and the stage was made up of a bunch of tables that were put together, and her foot slipped between the two tables and was caught there. So out of great compassion, I ran up to the stage to kind of help remove her from this, and in the process I knocked against the tables and squished her leg even more than before, you know. So I felt terrible. Don't you feel terrible when you do that? You've got, your heart's in the right place, but the skill isn't there. Okay? So there's those three interrelated qualities. The compassion to want to help, the wisdom to know the interactions, the subtle interactions, the cause and effect of things, for example, and the skill to be able to enter into the situation with the wisdom, with the compassion, to bring about the desired result. Those qualities are the qualities of enlightenment. Yes?
You mentioned intention last time.
Yes.
So how does that fit in? When you have the intention with the compassion, how does that contradict?
Oh, it's not contradicting. The reference here was made to the quality of intention, because this intention comes up when we speak about karmic, the subject of karma. That's a huge subject, but what it means, to boil down to its essence, is that if we create certain actions with a very positive, helpful motivation, the result is positive or happiness. It comes back to us like an echo. Whereas if our actions are motivated by greed and anger and jealousy and the delusions, then the result that comes back to us, like an echo, is an experience of suffering or dissatisfaction. So in these cases, the action, let's say the action of trying to help someone but ending up harming them, the intention was positive. So the intention creates positive karma, and that will have a positive result. Okay? But the action itself was not skillful. The action created harm, but it wasn't harm done with intention. So we don't create the negative karma of trying to harm someone. But the fact of the matter is that we did harm the other person. You know, so that suffering exists. We could say that we're responsible for it because we weren't totally aware and so forth, but that's not as heavy a karmic action as trying to harm someone else. Okay? So here we're talking about kind of two different things. When we talk about karma, we're talking about how we ourselves are affected by our own actions. So if we do something with a positive motivation, we receive something positive back. And if we do it with a negative motivation, we receive something negative back from that. That's just the workings of karma. Okay? But in addition to that, there is the way that there is the effect, the direct effect that we have on others. So maybe this will separate it out a little bit. If I have $1 million and there's some poor people and I give the $1 million to those poor people, probably it's going to have a good effect on them. You know, sometimes it doesn't, right? You know, we hear about people winning the lottery and then going nuts. You know? But if if we give it out in decent amounts, they'll have food that they might not have had before and shelter and so forth. So that giving created something positive for them. Right? But let us say that my motivation for giving out this $1 million was so people think I'm a really nice guy, so that I'll kind of buy my way into some society from which I'm now excluded. In other words, it's nothing but ego grasping. It's nothing but self-cherishing. Then even though I created some positive karma by giving, and that will have its effect, at the same time, I'm also creating a negative karma having to do with selfishness. So what I'll receive back from that action is very mixed, and could be quite negative. That doesn't negate the fact that the money might help the other people. So karma is talking about how our actions towards others ultimately affect ourselves. Okay? Okay, how about we use this time now for a little break. It's now 5 after, according to the clock on the wall. So why don't we return at, and I think there's maybe some tea and other things like that. So we can refresh ourselves, and we'll come back at a quarter after. Okay? Thank you. Okay. So during the break, I was told that the Gateways bookstore, for those who might be interested, have approximately 6 copies of these 2 books. These are books that I mentioned last week. Both are by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and this one is called Transforming the Mind, and it has much on these 8 verses of Lojong that we're going to start tackling soon. So Transforming the Mind. And the other one is a much older book called Kindness, Clarity, and Insight, which has quite a number of different sections to it, including one on the 8 verses that we're studying here, and one on the meaning of the compassion mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, and then a brief lamrim, or stages of the path teaching. So it's a collection of some really excellent works, most of them relatively short, but excellent, truly excellent. So Kindness, Clarity, and Insight is one. Transforming the Mind is the other. And so anyone who wants to do further reading or research on the topics that we're going to be bringing up over these weeks, those are 2 excellent works to look at. Okay? So, I wonder, is there any, before we actually tackle the first stanza of the 8, is there any pressing question you may have? Especially I'm thinking of the people who came for the first time this evening. Is there anything that you feel you'd like to ask, or a point you'd like that needs clarification? I don't mean to put anyone on the spot, but just sometimes I sense that there might be. Yes, please.
Well, I think I have a question. You said that the Bodhisattva being on the way to enlightenment.
Yeah.
And the question why was that to become blissful or happy. And then someone else said we're not alone.
Right.
So I got the sense of a sequence of first, before you can help others, you got to become enlightened. But then I said to myself, but obviously you can help others without being enlightened.
Exactly.
And then the question that I asked myself again was, well, how much helping others should you do, as well as how much practice and meditation should you do? So what is the ideal combination of both? Or is helping others practice also?
Just to repeat, since not everyone may have heard it, in brief, of the 2 activities, one being meditating to achieve spiritual aims such as enlightenment, and the other being helping others in the world, what is the best balance for the two? Is one better than the other, or like that? Just before coming to class, I read His Holiness's take on exactly that question. Is it in the handouts? Because if it's not, then it must be in one of the books I was reading. Does anyone remember reading that? It is in the handout. Okay, let me just find it, because I couldn't improve on his answer.
Is it paginated, John?
I'm sorry?
Is it paginated?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let me see if I can find it. I don't see it in that handout. Well, instead of taking your time trying to find the answer, I'll say it's there. Now, basically what he says is that we don't have to wait until we're enlightened to help others, obviously. And helping others is part of the practice. Of the two, in most cases, actually benefiting others is the most effective thing that we can do. However, His Holiness says, if we have reason to believe that by going into, let's say, a retreat for a period of time, that we'll be able to gain a realization that will increase our ability to benefit others, then it makes sense to do such intense practice. Because even though during that time we might not be actively helping anyone, that we're kind of maybe in a cave by ourselves, still it's like a medical student, isn't it? Who spends, let's say, the first 2 years of medical school doing nothing but studying. And you say, well, that's not helping anybody, or just sitting in the room studying. But obviously no one would think that, because without that study, he or she doesn't become a doctor and therefore can't benefit others. So it is a balanced approach that's necessary. One teacher that I knew said that, for instance, in a month, try to put a weekend aside for meditational retreat. The idea that during the rest of the time we do the activities, the normal life of whatever it is, earning a living or whatever we need to do, and in the process of that, of course, interact with others, hopefully on the basis of compassion, and then spend a period of time, kind of intense practice, to be able to open up and clarify our mind. So it is a combination of both.
Well, if your profession is medicine or whatever,
Yes.
but you get remuneration, how does that balance out? Because you're getting paid
Yeah.
for helping someone, as opposed, it sounds like this is supposed to be a generosity out of your heart, not any remuneration.
So the question here is, if you get paid for doing something good, is there a problem? No, that'd be great. It's just that it's sort of like it says in the Bible, we shouldn't let our right hand know what our left hand is doing. If the only reason that we're helping someone is to get paid, then we've transformed what could be a spiritual practice into a business. You're right. It's completely intention, right? But to think, well, I'm supposed to be helping someone from the goodness of my heart, so I shouldn't be paid for what I'm doing, it's just not realistic in this world, is it? Plus the fact that as long as we're not gouging other people, in other words, our receiving the remuneration is not actually harming someone, then there's a great deal of benefit that can be used for the money that we make. First, immediately, it keeps us alive. And if we're not alive, we can't do any practice. So we're not helpful to anyone. So just on that immediate level, there's a benefit. But beyond that, if we have excess, then we can make charity. We can help others. There's so many things that we can do. simply, we don't have to feel guilty for receiving something in return, since that's not our primary motivation.
It seems like helping others is in ultimately helping yourself.
Yes.
Is that our goal? Because it seems like a contradiction. Right? Does that make sense?
Right. Here, the question was, it seems like helping others is actually helping ourselves. Is there a contradiction there? Let me answer it by quoting something that His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, says very often. He says, if we check up our actions, often we discover that the motive behind it is selfish. You know, we're looking out for number one. You know, so many of our actions, right? Okay. But the way we go about being selfish, instead of making us happy and bringing true benefit, often traps us, makes us feel miserable. You know, like the thief who goes and steals something. You ask him, what was your motivation for stealing? And they'll say, well, to get money, to get rich. But then you discover that by the act of stealing, it ends up ruining his life or ruining his next life. In other words, it's just not skillful. Okay? So, the actions that we engage in under the influence of this selfishness look like we're doing it to benefit us, but they end up harming us, trapping us, limiting us. Okay? Does that make sense so far? Okay. So the Dalai Lama says, he says, okay, as long as we're going to be selfish, let's be wisely selfish. So what does it mean to be wisely selfish? That means to do those actions whose results actually bring us happiness and well-being and fulfillment and joy. And what are those actions? Helping others. Right? Because the kind of... Now, I'm not saying this as a pronouncement. Like with everything I say, this is something for us to consider and chew on and see if it makes sense to us or not, and sense of our experience. But what I seem to have noticed is that there's a big difference between the kind of pleasure or happiness we get when we do something for ourselves, solely for ourselves, and the kind of pleasure and happiness we get when we do something for others. One of them, the second one, goes much deeper. Much deeper. The former one is like the tide coming in and going out. You know, we experience the rush of pleasure or enjoyment, and then it fades away. Whereas when we do something truly to help others, the experience that we end up with is so much more deeply satisfying. And it also has a certain ring of truth about it, as if we're contacting something real about the universe, rather than something superficial. Okay? So, there it is in a nutshell. You know, we strive to become enlightened in order to help others, and we help others because it makes us feel truly good, truly alive, truly worthwhile. So the two, instead of being contradictory, fit together. I love that phrase of the Dalai Lama. He's the only one I've ever heard use it, except people who are quoting him. And that is to be wisely selfish. As long as we're going to be selfish, let's be wisely selfish. In other words, do those things which actually have the effect that we want, which is to be happy and have a sense of well-being and fulfillment. Okay? Whereas those things that we do only for ourselves don't have that ability. You know, they can give us pleasure. There's no question about that. But can they, you know, is it what we're hoping to find? Is it still what's in the back of our mind? You know, tends to be much more superficial than that.
Is that why we're doing enlightenment? It's for ourselves, ultimately?
Ultimately. No, I think ultimately still we're doing it because other beings are suffering. And there is something in the nature of compassion. There's something in the nature of having this open-hearted realization that other beings are suffering that compels us to want to do something about it. And while there's many things that we can do on a temporary basis to help others, like give food to the hungry and, clothes to the naked and, buildings to the people who don't have shelter, those kinds of things and more, while there's many things we can do on that level, even those, though helpful, aren't ultimate. The ultimate benefit that we can give to others is to lead them to their own awakening. Okay? But we can't really do that unless we've at least started to wake up. And we can't do it finally until we have fully wakened up. Right? But as we start kind of getting a better idea of what reality is all about, as we kind of wake up to reality, even before enlightenment, we can help give clues to the other people, to lead them. But this is not from the standpoint of superiority, like I'm enlightened and you're not, or I'm more enlightened than you, and you poor pitiful creatures, I've got to help you. It's not like that. It's quite different from that. I love returning to the example of if we see a small child or a small animal in trouble, why do we help the animal? Well, there's no reason that we help them. We don't have to sit there and think, should I help this small child who's in danger? Okay, here's 15 good reasons why I should and only 3 reasons why I shouldn't, so 15 to 3, okay, I'll help the child. We don't have to go through that, right? It's not part of our human makeup, is it, to have to think that way? That we have this heart-to-heart connection automatically, most of us, with small children or small animals, right? Of course, not everyone has that. But those people who actively hate and wish harm on children and small animals are damaged, right? Anyone who's undamaged has a heart which is opened in the presence of these creatures, these beings, right? So having that open-hearted connection, having that natural compassion impels us to want to help. We don't need a reason for it other than that connection. That itself is enough of a reason. Okay? Now, spiritual training is a matter of asking ourselves, well, if I can spontaneously feel this compassion for certain beings, those who are helpless or cute or little or my own relatives or whatever, if I can feel it to them, what is preventing me from feeling it towards everyone? And when we start asking that question, we realize the only thing preventing us is a fiction, a mistaken attitude, a misconception about who we are and who they are. It's a whole tissue of lies that we've been telling ourselves, and other people have been telling us, that makes us feel these beings are worthy of being happy and therefore I'll work for them, and these beings are worthy to be miserable and therefore I don't care if they, if they fall off the cliff or if something bad happens to them. That kind of discrimination, that kind of unbiased mind has no foundation other than ignorance. Whereas the open-hearted connection with others has not only a basis in reason, not only can you give good reasons for it, but it has the heart's reason, which is even stronger, which is unassailable. That when our heart goes out to someone, that connection is real on a level that our ordinary interactions, our selfish interactions, are unreal and inauthentic. Okay? I should exercise a little bit more self-control, but there's something else popped into my head. I've noticed over a number of years that there seems to be a thought going around that a lot of people seem to subscribe to, that to be a spiritual person, or to be on a spiritual path, or to cultivate selfishness, somehow or other, we should suffer. We shouldn't enjoy what we're doing. You know, that people sometimes feel guilty for experiencing pleasure or happiness. There was even an episode of Friends that aired a while ago, in which two of the characters wanted to do something truly selfless. That was really their motivation. But their criteria for the selfless action was that they shouldn't get anything out of it. Right? Do you remember that attitude? Do you remember that episode? Right? Phoebe was doing it. She felt... Right, right. In other words, she felt that if she got anything back from her interaction with someone else, then it wasn't selfish. It wasn't selfless, right? And therefore it wasn't pure. So I think she found, you know, someone who was truly annoying and, you know, to fall in love with, or like that, because if it was someone who was nice, then she was getting back the pleasure of being together with someone who was nice and handsome and like that. Also, Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest has very much the same thing going through it. If you want to check that out, if literature is your dharma, you might want to look at that as well. You know, what constitutes a selfless action? And so some people seem to feel that in order to be a spiritual practitioner, we have to wear the proverbial hair shirt. In other words, we have to be harming ourselves at the same time, or it isn't authentic. That if we're getting something back from it, that somehow lessens the value of that action. Buddhism in general, and the highest form of it, the Vajrayana in particular, says that's ridiculous. You know, that we're here to be happy, to be fulfilled, to have a sense of joy, of peace. And if what we do brings us that, great. Right? And if what we do to get feeling that way is to help others, then that's even better. Right? We don't have to think, you know, there's the story of the, someone's asked to define a Jewish mother, and of course it could be an Italian mother or any mother. When they use a Jewish mother, they say, Jewish mother is someone who goes into the child's bedroom, the son's bedroom, at night, and opens it up so he has plenty of fresh air, and then goes back into her own room and closes her windows so she shouldn't use up the supply. Right? That's also called the installation of guilt. Okay? So there is this kind of feeling that if we get something out of it, it's not pure. Well, it's true if the only reason we do something is to get something minuscule out of it, something temporary, some experience of superficial pleasure, like, you know, doing something for the sake of our reputation, you know, that kind of fleeting reputation, just so people have some nice things to say about us, then we really have to check our motivation. But if in the course of helping someone else, we get this sense of well-being, of peace, of happiness, of fulfillment, that's not bad. That's wonderful. You know, there's no reason to feel guilty about that. Okay. Well, should we get to work? Now that we have a few minutes left? Okay. So, those of you who have a copy, you might want to just look along. Look at what I'm reading from now is the top of page 3 of an article by His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama entitled The 8 Verses of Thought Transformation. And as I said, these other books that I refer to are other teachings by the Dalai Lama on the same thing that flesh it out in different ways. So the first stanza, or the first set of verses, is this. Determined to accomplish all success, I shall always practice holding dear all sentient beings who are more precious than wish-fulfilling gems. Okay? Do I have to repeat that, or do you all have that? Okay? So this is the first of the 8 stanzas written by this Lama who lived about 1,000 years ago, approximately, Langri Tongpa, who was a follower of Atisha's tradition of the Lojong teachings. So this is a very succinct form of the Lojong teachings of 8 4-line stanzas, and this, what we just read, is the first. This, it begins, in this translation, you'll see different ones, but this one begins, determined to accomplish all success. And what this relates to is the ultimate goal of practice, making our life truly worthwhile, which in this context, specifically within the context of these Lojong teachings, means striving for enlightenment, striving for bodhi, for full awakening. Okay? Because that attainment, the attainment where we can remove everything currently obscuring our mind and experience all of its good qualities to a limitless extent, specifically limitless compassion, limitless wisdom, and the limitless skill to help others. Those 3 qualities in particular. Okay? That is the greatest good. That achievement is the greatest good. It is the ultimate aim. And so determined to accomplish all success means that. It means that. It doesn't mean to necessarily to be well thought of by others or to have money or a position. Right? Those things may follow. And in fact, in the commentary it says that in fact many of them do follow. In other words, aiming for enlightenment, part of what that involves is avoiding harming others. Okay? Because if we actively harm others, this not only hurts them, but within this context, more importantly, it hurts our chances to wake up, to achieve enlightenment. Because harming others means we're giving sway to the delusions. We're creating negative karma. We're further encapsulating ourselves, further trapping ourselves in this prison of self. Instead of breaking free from it and experiencing the full potential of our consciousness, we're tying ourselves in a knot, a karmic knot. Okay? So, obviously, if we're really intent on achieving enlightenment, one of the first things we have to do is stop harming others. At least, intentionally harming others. I'm not talking about accidentally stepping on a mosquito. I mean this actively being involved in those attitudes that arise from ill will, wishing to harm. Okay? So, when we avoid harming others, when our speech becomes truthful instead of full of lies, when our physical actions become gentle instead of rough, needlessly rough, right? When our mind becomes calm rather than agitated, what happens? Well, from one point of view, we move closer to awakening. But as far as the world is concerned, we become a nice guy, right? We become someone that people are happy to be with. And so, if there's an extra piece of cake, they'll probably give it to us, right? So we get enlightenment and good tasting cake at the same time. In other words, we get a worldly reward even though that's not what we're looking for, right? So here, all success is very broad. It's aiming at enlightenment. By the way, other things pleasant happen, Does that mean people striving for enlightenment never have bad things happen to them? No. It's the purpose of this course. Is to try to deal with the bad things that happen to us as we're on the spiritual path. But generally speaking, those people who are out for themselves are generally disliked. And those people who are out for others are generally liked. And being liked means that we receive things even on a temporal level, even those things that we're not particularly looking for. Okay? So, here, the motivation, the ultimate motivation, determined to accomplish all success, is enlightenment. Okay? Then it says, okay, with that determination, what do we do? It follows, I shall always practice holding dear, or cherishing is another translation. I will always practice cherishing all sentient beings. All sentient beings. And sentient, that's not a word that's in very common usage, but it just means having a mind. That's all it means. So it's a living being. Someone who has a mind, a full complement of mental faculties. So a living being. And specifically it means those beings who have not yet achieved enlightenment. So all sentient beings means all presently unenlightened beings. Okay? So pretty much everyone we run into. Okay? With a few very notable exceptions. Okay? But the people we deal with in our everyday life, other sentient beings, people who like ourselves, who are like ourselves, they want to be happy, don't want to be unhappy. That's all sentient beings. Okay. So the aim is to accomplish all success, to win enlightenment. The means is to hold others dear, to cherish others. It's kind of the reverse, isn't it, of worldly attitudes. The worldly attitudes is we have a kind of recognizable goal. I want this. So how am I going to get it? By putting myself first, looking out for number one, as they say. Because if I don't look out for number one, other people might take it. I might not be able to get that result. So here, success is being defined in the world very narrowly. You know, getting that piece of cake, getting that last piece of cake, you know, or whatever it is, whatever that particular limited goal might be. There it is. And we think that the best way of getting to it is by pushing to the front. I remember some time ago being on an elevator, and the doors open. It was quite a crowded elevator, and this woman, and I mean, it's true, it was a woman in this case, didn't have to be, but it was. Okay? A woman kind of carrying an umbrella came onto the elevator like a bulldozer, you know, and pushed her way right into the back of it, you know. And then we went up a couple of floors, and it opened up, and then she pushed her way out. You know, there was no conception in her mind that, well, maybe since it's crowded, and since I'm only going up one or two floors, maybe the best thing for me to do is just go in just a little ways, just behind the door. Then I'll be the last one in and the first one out, and I'll make it through easily, and, you know, I won't disturb any other people. No, it's like, I deserve to be there. I'm going to go there if I have to knock over everybody else on my way in and on my way out, right? So there, what's success for her is maintaining my space, you know, right? Okay? So that's her success, okay? Right? And the reason, and the means for getting it, making sure I'm number one, okay? So the end result is when she leaves the elevator, everyone goes, shh, you know, what a bitch, right? So where was the benefit, right? In the short term or in the long term? Nowhere, right? She's just as caught up in this trap of ego as she was before. And now there's a whole elevator full of people who hate her. Okay, who are definitely not going to give her the last piece of cake. Okay? So here, the goal, the success, is much broader than that, right? It's this ultimate aim, this ultimate goal, really waking up really experiencing enlightenment. And the means is not to look after oneself, but to look after or cherish others. Quite opposite. Quite opposite. But as we've already talked about, even before we turn to this stanza, that is the means. Because, and I know there's some questions, so I'll bring this to an end and then I'll open it to those questions. Our heart's natural state is radiant. That's the quality of our deepest consciousness, is to radiate out. And that's when we are most fulfilled, most happy, most joyful, when we can give rein to this inner radiance. But for many, many different reasons, including the hard knocks we get in life, much of this light is turned in on itself. You know, we become crusted over, afraid, defensive. Right? And so this energy, whose natural expression is outgoing, becomes wrapped, involuted, convoluted, twisted upon itself. The reason for that, you know, the rationale for that is, I have to look out for myself. You know, I've been burnt before by others. You know, I've opened myself to others, and what have they done? They've betrayed me. So therefore, I have to wrap myself in this protective cloak. Okay? So, it's aiming for self-protection, for self-maintenance. But the end result is that we imprison ourselves. Okay? So, instead of its natural radiance, our consciousness, our heart, our energy turns in on itself. So, if we are in fact striving to wake up, to experience reality, to give full rein to all the potential within our heart, within our mind, then we have to radiate outwards. In other words, we have to reverse this trend, this I don't want to say introspective, because introspection is good, you know, but this kind of knotted, self-defensive, self-preoccupied mode of behavior. So there's a very, very powerful way of doing that. What? Start paying attention to others. There they are. They're all around us every day. They're the people we work with, the people we live with, the people we bump into. They're all there. They all want to be happy. None of them wants suffering. They all have this, ultimately, the same ambition, looking for the same Coca-Cola, ultimately, right? And many of them are completely lost. They truly think that the path to happiness is to cocoon themselves in selfishness. You know, they really have bought into that. Or they bought into the myth of consumerism, that possessions is the means for happiness, right? Or they bought into militarism, that aggression is the means for happiness. You know, they brought into one or more of these lies. None of them are true. None of them bring, some of them bring momentary pleasure, sure, but none of them bring calmness, peace, happiness, joy, fulfillment. None of them do. Okay? So there they are, striving like me to be happy, making themselves miserable. They're the perfect beings to cherish. Because by cherishing them, by really being concerned with their welfare rather than just my own, I'm starting to turn outwards this involuted energy, this convoluted attitude of only looking out for myself, which only traps me in further suffering. So because I want the best success, that's why I pay attention to others. Okay? Now, put in those terms, it sounds like a business transaction, doesn't it? But we've already discussed, it's not a business transaction, it's just getting to the natural, if I can use that term, or authentic, maybe that's better, getting to the authentic level of our being, you know, this radiant quality of heart, this radiant quality of mind. Mhm. So, and then why hold others dear? You know, how to regard them? They are actually more precious to us than wish-fulfilling gems. And here, this is from Indian mythology. It's like Aladdin's lamp. You find this gem, usually as the result of a great struggle. The hero goes out and finds his gem, and then once you're in possession of it, it's like magic. You know, whatever you wish for, you get. That's a wish-fulfilling gem. So other beings are like wish-fulfilling gems. By serving them, we get everything that we want. Do we get it immediately? No, not immediately. Ultimately, yes. Okay? Sometimes what we get immediately is disappointment. We do something to help someone and they turn around and slap our face or betray us, you know? But ultimately, by turning our hearts to the welfare of others, we touch this authentic place in ourselves, which is the potential for full enlightenment. Okay. Don't have much time, but I noticed there was a few persistent either questions or comments, so if anyone still wants... I thought I might be mistaken, I thought I saw a couple of hands raised. Oh yes, thank you.
You speak about waking up
Yes.
to reality.
Yes.
What is wrong with the present reality that we're in?
What's wrong with the present reality that we're in?
I think that's going to take more than 5 minutes, right?
I'm going to give the Reader's Digest version. Okay. She was joking because this is a huge topic, okay? And in fact, especially when we reach the 8th of these stanzas, that's where we kind of address it more specifically, but I'll say a few words about it now. First, we shouldn't get the idea from what I said that there's two realities. There's this reality, which is one, and then another reality, which makes two, and therefore we should give up this reality, which is wrong, and get that reality, which is right. It's not like that at all. We each live in our own world. You know, aspects of that world we hold in common with others. So there's certain common elements to reality. Like everyone here identifies this as a room, right? So there's something common. But each of us has our own experiences as well. Right? Like some people find this room real pleasant and some find it unpleasant. That's a kind of petty example. But we each have our own personal way of relating to the world. That's like our own reality, let's say. Okay? But the problem is that as we relate to other people and our environment and even ourselves, we're not seeing things as in the way they actually exist. Instead, we're seeing them through the filter of our own projections. Okay? And the example that I like to use, and again, I think I may have used it last week, I'm not sure, is that when two people of different races who are living in a racist society, okay? So that's the given here. When they meet each other, they don't see each other. Okay? So if we live in a society where black people are one thing and white people are another thing, right? That when one black person and one white person meet each other on the street, they don't see they don't see another human being. They see a stereotype. right? In other words, they project a whole bunch of qualities onto that other person. So the process of understanding reality in that case starts with removing these false projections. Because until we do, until we stop identifying that person as only through, only as a member of that race, and on top of that, I don't like that race, until we stop doing that, we don't see that this is another human being, just like ourselves, having good points and bad points. Can you grant that? I mean, is that understood? So what we're talking about here is stripping away from the objects of our experience the projections that we place there. Now, where do these projections come from? Ultimately, if we really trace it back in a very kind of precise way, it comes from the mistaken view that we have of ourself. Remember I said this petty drama in which we cast ourselves as villains or as heroes or as, whatever it is, right? That's not our ultimate mode of being. That's just an edited script that we're following. The person who is very badly abused thinks, I'm a bad person, right? Is he or she a bad person? Does that explain the limit of that person's human potential? No, of course not. But for many, many different reasons, that person has learned to identify himself or herself in that narrow way. He or she is not even seeing their own being for what they are. Even that is obscured by a projection, by a false image. So wisdom here, waking up, first and foremost, doesn't mean, okay, this reality is wrong, the other reality is better. It's not that. It's stripping from our view everything that is preventing us from seeing things just as they are. Just as they are. Okay? So it relates to the projections we have about ourselves, the projections we have about others, the concrete way in which things are appearing to us. It is that kind of projection, that kind of misconception, which is to be removed through the development of wisdom, through waking up. Okay? It's not like this view is wrong, but if we went to the other room and put on different glasses, then we'd get a view that's right. It's not like an alternate universe like that. It's that within every perception, there's elements which are correct and elements which are incorrect. And the elements that are incorrect are projections of an ignorant mind. And that's what we have to wake up to. Okay? So, here we are at the end. As I promised, we didn't do the first 3 stanzas. Well, we did the first one. I always do. I'm so proud of myself. But I'm also very proud and grateful to you. It's not the easiest thing to come out on a night like this, and I do very much appreciate that. So very quickly, if there's anything positive gained by the foolishness that took place here this evening, then let us dedicate it to not only to our own awakening,